Gavin from Smart Kitchen Facelifts, and here's what's smart. Floating shelves in kitchens, we all love them, but they're actually quite tricky and complicated to put up, especially if they're deep shelves. And deep shelves, you'll always see them on a bit of a lean. So how's it done? How do we do it? Well, if you're a DIY person and want to go down to your local hardware store to pick up a bracket, there are a couple of things that you need to know and understand when putting up a shelf. This is the first one. Something like this you'll buy gets screwed onto the wall. Now this is a floating shelf bracket. It's a specialized, well, it's a detailed bracket. What it is, it's only designed for floating shelves. It's got two little holes there and it gets screwed into the wall. And when it gets screwed into the wall, you drill a hole through the center of your thick shelf and the shelf simply slides on to the bracket as such, and you don't see the bracket. It's in the center of the thick shelf. So the thick shelf is normally about 50, 60, and sometimes even 70 mil thick. And then the shelf bracket is in the middle. Now that's only screwed onto either the stud, and you can screw it this way as well if it's a stud, because obviously you may miss the stud if it's that wide, so you can put it that way, or you can put it that way, or if it's into a brick wall, you simply just drill the holes into this, the masonry where you need them. That's a floating shelf bracket. That's one option. Or you can do an L bracket. So this is an L bracket. Just that's an L bracket. Not with this part here. That's an L bracket. And we all know what an L bracket is. It's the shape of an L. And that gets screwed onto the wall. You can turn the bracket sideways and screw it into the wall that way. Now you would have a couple more holes there if it's a bracket from the hardware store. Drill that into the wall, or the stud. If it's a stud, you may want to go that way. But if you haven't got a backing behind the shelf and you want no bracket seen, you would have to put the bracket that way. And the thick bracket here fits behind the floating shelf. You may have to rebate out some of the shelf at the back. Or if it's a shelf that you made yourself, you can do a 16 mil and a 16 mil and then leave the 16 mil gap in the middle, and you have a 48 millimeter shelf with a cavity or a void in the middle. So this is where that bracket sits into that cavity, and the shelf slides onto that bracket. Again, the shelf would be hidden by this bracket and the shelf slides over the bracket. For really deep shelves, I suggest making a custom bracket, which is something like I've got in my hand. This goes into the wall, into the stud, and then you can simply screw in either side of the bracket over there. That goes behind the gyprock. You gyprock over the top of that, and then you're left with this little spriget then you can drill a hole through your floating shelf, and then that again, the shelf slips over that metal rod, and that is how you keep your floating shelf on. So there's a couple of different options for you for floating shelves. If you're going to buy a shelf in the hardware store and it's a thick shelf, you'll have to drill a hole through the center of the shelf. So an L bracket will do that quite effectively. You can always do a standard L bracket on an angle and then screw that onto the wall and simply rebate out some of the back of the timber shelf just to fit that bracket, that L bracket that you've screwed into the brickwork or the stud, and that would hide that. So a couple of common ones are that floating shelf bracket is quite common, but it's not very deep. So I wouldn't recommend going further than 200 millimeters with the depth of that shelf, but even that's a little bit far, maybe 170. So if you want a deeper floating shelf, an L bracket is the way to go. So good luck, and the smart solution is the floating shelf bracket or the L bracket, which goes into the wall. So we actually custom make these. These are not very expensive. They're about, I think about $35 for me to make one of those, and these are welded. If you want these brackets, please visit our website. I can instruct you on where to get them and where I have them made, smartkitchenfacelifts.com.au, and that is the smart tip of the day. Thanks for watching.